think we're live, but we're still waiting for Zoom to do what it does. Inshallah.
We're live.
We're live?
We are live.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to the believers and to everyone else who is attending with us today. Today we have a very special guest, kind of a guest. I mean, you know, this brother is someone who has been a part of, you know, milestone stuff since we were just a little halakha study group. And yeah, mashallah. So, you know, some people may be familiar with this, others may not. We all kind of started as a group of, you know, young people involved in movement and struggle, what have you, who we got together as a study group in order to, you know, study our deen, study the religion as it pertains to politics and as it pertains to the social movements we're involved with, as it pertains to, you know, justice, social justice, political power, and all of the kinds of things that concern us as, you know, people seeking change, seeking to transform society. And so we formulated as a just a little small group of people to study together, you know, people who we appreciated each other's perspective. We found, you know, support and encouragement in each other in our struggles. And so we decided to study together. And the first book that we started with was Milestones by Ustad Saeed Qutb. And it was like it was a, can I say, fundamental experience.
Yeah, that's right.
It was a fundamental experience, at least for myself, and I know for some others, you know, and it sparked a kind of thirst for knowledge in a different way, you know, because we're all familiar with, and maybe some of you are, maybe some of you aren't familiar with this, but there's a whole lot of groups who get together and deal with knowledge as a sort of exercise, or as a sort of entertainment or pastime. And so we really wanted to get away from that. And, you know, so this thirst for knowledge had always, for us as a group, come with a strong sense of, you know, wanting to apply it, wanting to put things into practice, wanting to learn things that we can use immediately in our efforts to make change. And, you know, I mean, most of us met in either protests for Oscar Grant or protests for Trayvon Martin. And so we were all, from the beginning of even meeting each other, we were all very much involved in movements for social justice, social change, political power, empowerment for Black people and oppressed people in general, et cetera. And so the study group really sparked, you know, it sparked a lot for us, and it brought some of us very close together, and kind of opened up for us a pathway of a particular kind of knowledge, which is, you know, knowledge and struggle, knowledge that's beneficial to struggle and gained from struggle. And this is the spirit in which we come to you today, which is, you know, we're dealing with some of our elders, some of our predecessors who were swept up in a very similar kind of phenomenon, except, you know, we know from history that they were involved with things that became way more well-known, way more publicized, etc. But it was a very similar process for them. You know, you had people involved in struggle, they got exposed to some kind of knowledge and they saw the benefit in it, and they engaged with each other for the sake of spreading that knowledge, for increasing it, and for making it applicable and applying it and making it bear fruits and results. And so that's why we're here today. That's why we are here today, continuing this series. This episode is special, just like we have our brother Abdul Rahman. We're going to be talking about a very special sister named Safiya Bukhari. And so that's kind of our introduction. We're going to get into it briefly, but just before we do, I want to remind people that we do have a fundraiser up.
Coming up. It's not
Coming up.
Not out yet.
Okay.
But it's going to be a new fundraiser. It's the same fundraiser, but because it's, again, those of you who were in here last time, it's going to be a fundraiser with the old fundraiser, but in a new format, because that's what the Launch Good fundraiser, they wanted us to do that. So, stay tuned. We'll let you know. We'll update you about that. So it's a fundraiser jointly for Black Dawah Network and Milestones. So that's the fundraiser thing. Should we get started with this conversation?
Yeah,
inshallah.
Yes.
So the question I would have for Abdul Rahman is just if you could give us an introduction to Safiya Bukhari for those viewers who don't know anything about Safiya Bukhari, just a basic introduction, and then we go to the other questions, inshallah, and have a conversation.
Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Safiya Bukhari, may Allah be pleased with her, was a Muslim, Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army member. She was a citizen of the Republic of New Africa, political prisoner, also one of the co-founding members of the Jericho Amnesty Movement, a movement to gain amnesty for political prisoners within the United States. She was an excellent example of how the Black liberation struggle is a branch of the Islamic struggle, and also how the Islamic struggle strengthens the Black liberation struggle for her personally, as well as what she was seeing around the work of the people who were around her within the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. She personally is someone who's inspired me to be extremely self-critical, or a lot more self-critical in my work, in my analysis, and my assessment of, the benefit as opposed to harm, as well as checking my intentions, as consistently, a lot more consistently than, I guess, prior to me becoming a Muslim, being an activist in the social justice struggle or the Black liberation struggle. Mm-hmm. So for me personally, the way that she breaks down a lot of her own critique of herself, as well as some of the critiques she had of the party and the party's function, she's an excellent example to learn necessary lessons from the history.
Could you tell us a little bit, because we have an Islamic audience, just sort of like her religious background prior to Islam, her transition into political life, and then how she got introduced to Islam and her faith and so on? That would be really great if you could get that information.
Inshallah, yeah. So she talks a little bit about in her book, which is the primary source for this discussion that we're having here, is The War Before, which is a collection of different essays throughout the course of her political life. And one chapter in particular we're drawing from is Islam and Revolution is Not a Contradiction. But she also talks about throughout different points of the book and in some of her interviews, how she became Muslim is from not even studying it for herself with the intention of actually becoming, but defending her brothers, Na and Jalil Muntakin, who are also Black Panthers and members of the Black Liberation Army. So because of there being some internal contradictions and a lot of people within the left being strict Marxists or Maoists or whatever people were adhering to outside of an Islamic paradigm, people were critical of anything claiming to be revolutionary, but also believing in God. So because Safiya was very supportive of her brothers and seeing people who were doing the work should have the right to practice how they see fit, she started to defend them in study. And I actually read a little bit from her book, which is in kind of like the first 2 pages of the chapter we're talking about. She explains what drove her to become a Muslim. So she says, Bismillah, I became a Muslim, one who submits to the will of Allah while in the Black Panther Party and as a result of defending the rights of members of the New York Three. As someone who had been reared in the Christian church and a family full of ministers and deacons, I knew the Bible well and had participated in the choir, usher board, and Sunday school in church. I had also been privy to a lot of things being done by people who were supposed to be quote unquote saved and quote unquote going to heaven that made me doubt the existence of God. I had decided that there could not be a God if these people were going to heaven and others were not. It was Nuh Kiyam, Albert Nuh Washington, who inadvertently made me see things differently. When they were captured and returned to New York, the New York Three were housed in the tombs. People within and close to the Black Panther Party were criticizing and questioning how Nuh and Jalil could be Muslims and revolutionaries, questioning their commitment to the struggle. I looked upon Nuh as a mentor. As a matter of fact, I called him my teacher. So instead of joining in the criticisms of him, I defended his right to self-determination. I reminded those who objected to his being Muslims that we were fighting for the right to freedom and self-determination. I said, how can we talk about self-determination if we would deny, excuse me, someone their freedom to determine whether or not they want to believe in the existence of God? The debate became hotter and hotter, and to shore up my position, I decided to study the religion for myself. Nuh turned me on to a book by Muhammad Qutb called Islam, The Misunderstood Religion. That book answered a lot of my questions about religion. It especially answered my questions about how there could be a God while people who said they worship him were doing things they were doing. But it was reading the Quran for myself that made me decide that I wanted to study the Islamic way of life. As I studied, I learned that Allah makes Muslims and man does not, which to me meant that simply declaring there's none worthy of worship but Allah does not make you Muslim, but it is the intentions of your heart and your determination to struggle in the way of Allah that makes you Muslim. I read Surah 2, ayats 190 through 193, where Muslims are admonished to fight in the cause of God, those who fight you, and to fight them until there is no more tumult or oppression. For tumult and oppression is worse than slaughter. So in 1971, in Sam Corey Masjid in Greenhaven Correctional Facility at Stormville, New York, I declared Shahada, testified faith, and determined that I would strive to stay and struggle in the straight way. So there she kind of like breaks it down, like the things in society that led her to actually study, but then also kind of giving you a little bit of her personal background and like what led her to not consider herself a Muslim up or even a believer in God up until that point. And it just shows you the beauty of, like she said it right there, Allah makes Muslims, man does not. You know, man plans and Allah plans, but Allah's a better planner. So even though she wasn't trying to hear nothing about no God, right, you know, Allah made it clear to her, you know, who was in charge. So
there's two things that I want to kind of pull from that, from just all of that, your response to that question. One is going to be to you, Abdulrahman, and then the other one is going to be to you, Tanzim. So first of all, as she's talking about people kind of persecuting Nuh and Jalil, does that resonate with any experiences that you've had as someone involved with struggle, involved with politics and organizing, etc., and then becoming Muslim?
Yeah, for sure. I think I do, and I think oftentimes in the left, people usually who fall under atheists, but even if not, you know, who tend not to be Muslim, confuse like when people bring up the issue of morality as like automatically falling into this bourgeois respectability politics concept, as opposed to actually a certain type of program and training to qualify you to be able to practice struggle, you know? So with Islam, it's like that's paramount to, you know, being able to organize, you know, National United Front against fascism or whatever, for you being even qualified to be able to participate in that role by doing your own self-reflection and self-check-in and, you know, making sure that your deeds and intentions are pure and beneficial and not harmful. And you're not actually being driven by your own ego, but by, you know, the dictates of what Allah says you need to do in order to be prepared to struggle. So I think with me personally, people oftentimes, I've witnessed that people, you know, will disregard any type of call towards, you know, morality or internal intention checking within like the leftist movement, which is largely driven under the concept that anything having to do with morals or believing in God is just a way to slow down, you know, the rest of the actual revolutionaries, when in reality, you can see historically that Islamic revivals and revolutions seem to last for centuries, largely because of the groundwork and the footwork, you know, that's been done. So I see it as like, personally, I can relate because I felt that, though I don't, you know, liken myself to the level of struggle that they've, you know, participated in. I definitely can feel like I felt that from people, making me feel pressure not to believe in a God when I felt personally that I and my close comrades needed some type of moral checking. So.
You know, that's it's really interesting to think about. Obviously, I have my own experiences with that. One thing, you know, and I think this kind of goes right into what I want to ask the Tanzim too, which is that you know, there's this sort of general attitude about God, about religion, and about morals that is apparently holdover from the Euro-Christian colonization of the world. For example, the European church colonizes the land. They use their imperial religion. And I say imperial religion because it's not the religion of Jesus. Isa al-Islam. It's not what he practiced, it's not what he taught, but they do it under the name of Christianity. And so you have this imperial doctrine that comes from an empire of colonization, an empire of aggressors, right? And so they have this religious set of morals and ethics, et cetera, that they use to control populations once they've used military to lay siege and colonize them. So then they start to rely on this framework of morality, which is totally tied to the empire and the colonization of people and their lands, etc. Right? But for some reason, Black revolutionaries, there's this historical pattern of constantly there in every generation being these Black revolutionaries who revert to Islam. So what's the difference there? Why is it that Muslims think that's different than this sort of imperial religion of Christianity, right? And it makes me more curious about what she was saying about Muhammad Qutb's book. And knowing, you know, and I have my own thoughts, obviously, but I want to draw this out for our viewers, you know, that there is a contradiction when thinking of the historical role of Christianity and morals, etc. But for Muslims, there is a different set of concerns, preoccupations, etc. when you talk about spirituality. And this is what Safiya Bukhari is talking about, that she was exposed to by reading this book, which was given to her or suggested to her by Na. And this ties directly to us because, you know, our study group, as I was saying before, started with a book that was written by Muhammad Qutb's brother, right? Is that right, Tanzim?
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that ties into Islamic movement, or why is there this? Why do people consider there to be a fundamental difference between an imperial kind of religion, morality, etc., versus a liberatory kind of religion, morality, etc.?
I mean, that's a great question. And it's a question that requires a lot of thinking, and actually it's hard to do justice to that question in a brief time, but I'll try my best to kind of answer it by referring to Muhammad Qutb, but also before I do that, responding to your assessment, which I agree with, which is that the history of how Christianity emerged and in sort of colonized lands and with enslaved and colonized populations, the way Christianity was used by the master and the colonial settler for populations as actually a moral code that would pacify them. So it's a religion. So it's because religion itself as a category emerged at a particular time. So, you know, Islam, for example, we shouldn't call it religion, it's the deen. It's a complete comprehensive mode of life. It's not a religion. Once it's reduced to a religion, then it runs the risk of being used by various forces for their own purposes of pacification. So, you know, when Christianity becomes religion, because there's an emergence of the secular, which is universal, and religion becomes a particular, and that's where enslaved and colonized people are placed in there so they can practice Christianity and become passive. So I think the first, and I have this question for you more as an empirical question. I would ask that later, that, you know, how did you and Abdul Rahman, you know, come to Islam? Just like other revolutionaries in earlier generations, they embraced Islam. It's almost like Islam is the unofficial religion of Black liberation. That's sort of a history of Islam. But, you know, one thing that I wanted to highlight is that there is a history of also of Christian liberation theology, which was influenced actually by Malcolm's remarks about Christianity. So a lot of the Black Christians who couldn't leave Christianity tried to develop a different kind of Christianity that was useful and effective and more concerned with struggle. But my response to that, even in my classes when I teach in religion, you know, I have very good students earlier who were very much interested in liberation theology. And one of the things that we had discussed, particularly with the works of actually Sherman Jackson, who writes about it, is that Islamic orthodoxy itself has responses that allow to think about struggle. It's the orthodoxy, meaning the actual corpus itself. You don't have to reimagine Islam to provide the solution. When it comes to Christianity, in order to be revolutionary, you have to come up with a new theology of Christianity to do that. So in other words, when it comes to Christianity, it's not the orthodoxy that allows you to think about revolution. When it comes to Islam, it's actually mostly the Sunni militant tradition that is the corpus itself. So this is the major advantage, I think, for those of us who are watching this, of Islam. Immediately go to the Quran and you can see the answers. You go to the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and you see the answers to lots of problems that we're talking about today, 1400 years later. Now, going to the Muhammad Qutb's book and Muhammad Qutb's influence is remarkable. When I was actually not so well read on Safiya Bukhari. I read the book recently, and when I read that, one of her main influences was Muhammad Qutb's book. Right, and that book was very crucial for Islamist thought. I mean, we know about Sayyid Qutb's, you know, book Milestones and his commentary on the Quran, but Muhammad Qutb, as Sayyid Qutb's brother, also wrote about conditions of modernity. So, you know, he basically dealt with, which is very interesting, because the story that Abdul Rahman just now shared, which is about how in the Panthers and the BLA, there were suspicion about religion, right? So she wanted to defend two brothers who were Muslim, and then she got introduced. Now that suspicion actually has a long legacy in leftist politics. And Muhammad Qutb was responding to the communists who were propagating ideas that Islam is a religion also which is going to make you part of kind of reactionary, their word was reactionary, and will not allow you to disalienate yourself from capitalism. So Muhammad Qutb's book is actually a response to both capitalist and communist interpretations of religion. So he then shows in his book different categories like feudalism, slavery, capitalism, imperialism, etc., and writes sort of paradigmatically that even though the Arab world had experienced, even under Islam, there were forms of slavery that were there, and he kind of compared it to other areas. So every society, every civilization went through processes of slavery. Then they graduated into another stage of history. And so he kind of looked at how remarkably fast that under Islam, the fight and struggle against slavery was there. And this is a very important document that even one could talk about. And our dear brother Hakim Muhammad, Black Dawah Network, wrote some articles about it, about how Afrocentrists use and talk about Islam as an Arabic religion, and therefore it's a form of another kind of domination. So it's a response to that. And I think Muhammad Qutb, just like Sayyid Qutb and Maulana Maududi, deals with this question of this leftist propaganda against Islam. And there we see a kind of focus on sovereignty. Who's the sovereign? Allah is the only sovereign. All other forms of worldly powers are below Allah. And as Muslims, we're obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So any system of governance, any system of institutions that are trying to oppress us, that's a form, obeying that would be a form of shirk. It would be forbidden in our religion, in our Orthodox tradition. So this is, I think, what attracted Bukhari to come to Islam in a major way and promoted her to the Quran to her. So she went to the Quran, the original sources, and embraced Islam. And that's a beautiful thing. Alhamdulillah for that. So that's my response. And I would ask you that question: is that in your journey also between Christianity and Islam, why was Islam the obvious choice as a person thinking about oppression? That's something I think our viewers would like to know, because you guys had reverted back to Islam, and it's a different story that I can't tell that story. Yeah, inshallah.
You want to say something?
Sure, inshallah. So, personally, I had taken a lot of my moral lessons from what I was taught from my mother as a non-denominational Christian, and I still believe and practice some of the things that she made it a point to stress into me. But once I got active in struggle, I had actually, I didn't consider myself Christian at that point. I definitely still believed in God, but I didn't consider myself a practitioner of any religious path. And after a few years in struggle, in a lot of highs and lows and inconsistency, and in certain levels of progress amongst myself and others that were around me, I started to notice a lot of issues that I guess early in becoming active would overlook, because I was so excited about being active in the struggle. A lot of liberties that were taken with women, myself included. A lot of lack of actual theoretical grounding, a lot of soundbite understanding, and being able to drop quotes but not actually analyze and practice the meaning behind the things that we were practicing. So I was looking for something that could help me stop doing what I was perceiving as more harm than good. I had a few realizations that some of the people I looked up to were just human like me, and were extremely flawed, and that forced me to reflect on myself and to start to look for something that would help me sustain and start to be more conscious about some of the harm that I was doing. And a lot of the people that I looked up to and studied, I found had accepted Islam. Some of the people that were around me that were some of those that I still did respect, and just did have a respect for their moral understanding and practice, were Muslim. And I started to ask them more questions, and I started to study myself, and I realized I needed something for myself. And then I wasn't a father yet, but I was on the way to becoming a father. I knew I needed something for myself and my children, a foundation that would help them separate between good and evil, even while fighting for, quote unquote, good or social justice. So that's what I kind of saw as the transition. And it was the fact that in Islam, which we could talk about a little later, as Safiya Bukhari kind of talks about this as well, is the understanding of fear, having a fear of God, stems from wanting to please your creator, not from feeling like there's some type of colonial, paternal, unfair force that you have to adhere to for survival. It's a matter of wanting to show your gratitude and actually do what you were created to do, because you know that's what's going to make the world a better place.
Right.
You know, so in Islamic understanding and, you know, avoiding shirk and, you know, Safiya Bukhari kind of talks about this as well. It eliminates room for you to, for the enemy to play on your weaknesses of your shortcomings and your fear, because you're taught to eliminate the ego and to only fear Allah. So it can't, your fear of other things can't be used against you. And like I said, we can talk about it a little later, but she talks about that in this chapter as well. Like her issues with shirk and getting over her fear of snakes and things like that, and how, you know, Islam helps her to fortify her internal, you know, strength to stand up against the torture, mental torture, and different things of prison. So
that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've spoken a little bit about my journey here. You know, initially the seed was planted. My sister gave me a copy of Malcolm X's autobiography, and so I had, you know, my earliest understanding of revolutionaries was like Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Malcolm X. Now, if you know anything about them, all three of them were very outspoken about the fact that they believed they were being guided by the Creator. They were very outspoken about the fact that they were being guided by their Creator. And I mean, you know, Nat Turner was a preacher, or I don't know what you want to call it, reverend or whatever. He was a preacher, we know that much. Harriet Tubman was known as Moses. So there's that, you know, and then there's Malcolm X, you know. And so for me, I had, from early on in life, I had a kind of a model of what revolution was in the back of my head. And it was like, you know, it is this kind of thing where just how I understand it, only a spiritual mission can pull you out of your material subjugation.
Right.
When you're being overwhelmed by a material force that you can't physically beat, then only spirituality can liberate you from that. Yet and still, you know, not just any spirituality. You can't just sit down and meditate and think that your meditation is freedom. You know, the spirituality for me, it comes in when you find yourself driven by a cause that's bigger than your own suffering. So that means I'm going to do this thing that needs to be done, even if it costs me personal suffering. Because the spiritual drive that I feel outweighs the suffering that I got to experience.
Right.
Because I could die in the process, I could be beaten, tortured, whatever. Any number of things could happen to me in the process. I can lose my belongings, I can lose my home, I can lose everything I'm attached to in this world. You can lose everything that you're attached to in this world, but it's the spirituality which causes a person to act against their own petty interests. So my petty interests are my physical, material interests, like the money in my pocket, the clothes on my back, the home that I live in. Those are my petty interests, right? But my bigger, larger interest is my soul. My soul has an interest. My soul is invested in justice. My soul is invested in righteousness. Thus, the value of spiritual attainment is always going to outweigh the value of my petty concerns or my petty interests as an individual person, right? And so for me, that was spirituality and that was revolution. And from a very early age, that's the way I understood it, but not in a sophisticated way, just in a very simple way of, you know, Harriet Tubman that turned to Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
There you go.
Just
Deadly,
a real
that's a deadly
simple
combination
kind
right
of
there.
way. You know what I mean? And I just understood it like,
Right.
you know what I mean? And they had this kind of spirituality which caused them to overcome whatever fear they had of their oppressor.
Right.
They had a spirituality which caused them to overcome any reluctance that they had to sacrifice and struggle for what's good and what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I always had that in the back of my head. And then, you know, getting older, as you go from a child into an adult, your petty interests start to, you know, they start to weigh on you. They start to become everything. You know, life becomes all about, you know, your how much money you have, your clothes, where you live, what you eat. Life becomes all about the material things after a certain age, and you know, it's easy to get consumed with just the basic tenets of survival.
Right.
You know, and I think, you know, that happened to me like a lot of other people. But I still retained my interest and investment in, you know, social change, etc. And like Abdul Rahman was saying, you start to look at these people that you've admired all your life, and you start to realize that they all had a very deep spirituality. And so for me, that much was obvious. But then the question is, well, not one question, but 1,000 questions is how it came to me.
Mm-hmm.
It came to me as 1,000 questions. Well, you know, if God created us and wants this and that for us, then why do we live like we live?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we experiencing this? Why are we allowed to be oppressed? Why this? Why that? Why is it that Black people are allowed to be in the situation that they're in? Why does God allow us to be this way?
Mm-hmm.
Why, you know,
Right.
you know, just
1,001
questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why this? Why that? What about this? How did this happen? Why this? And with everything else that I explored, you'd meet a limitation where there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions that just couldn't answer. Right. But with Islam, every question I could think of, there was a reasonable answer. When I said reasonable, there was an answer that made sense to me. Not just an answer that I gotta struggle to just accept that doesn't make sense, but it was something that was like innate to me, like it just made sense. You can feel the truth of it, and so that's how I experienced it. And I think, you know, it pertains a lot to what I assume Sister Safiya Bukhari must have been experiencing when she was reading that book, Islam: The Misunderstood Religion. Because if you started out with a Western kind of perspective on religion and a Christianized kind of perspective on religion, you know, you already kind of like leave that stuff over there, you know. And I think that's part of the purpose of it, is to kind of, you know, alienate people from religion itself, or from spirituality itself, you know, because, you know, as Tenzin was saying, religion isn't the best word, but ultimately, you know, it was kind of like, you know, it just made so much more sense. Islam just made so much more sense, whereas other things just didn't have an answer, you know. And then you look around, like he was saying, you look around and you see the people you respect, you see the most dedicated revolutionaries, and they have a deep spirituality. They happen to be Muslims. And then when you start getting close to people, they were the ones who, when you're sick, they come through. They come through with food or whatever you might need. They come through. You know, when you're in trouble, they come through. When you're in danger, they come through. When you're in need, they come through. These are the believers. These are the ones who they will trade their wealth and their material success just to help their sister or brother. These are the believers. And you come to know Islam. The best way you come to know Islam is through the believers. it's the best way to come to know Islam, because you can read about it, you can read Quran, you can read Hadith, you can read all of these things, but nothing is going to affect you the way the believers affect you when you are around them, when you have close connections with believers, because you see the level of integrity and you see the level of love that they cultivate within themselves, and you see their commitment, and it opens your eyes to other things. So
can I say something? Because your answer, Hannibal, about the question, which is really a question that is like fundamental in liberation theology, is why did this happen to us as a group?
yeah,
Like all groups who are oppressed, they ask this question.
yeah,
Why did this happen to us? And therefore questioning God, right?
right.
And I think, one of the things that's really important is that to know, and also the other thing that you mentioned about material needs, necessities of life, and then there's also a spiritual need of human beings, right? One of the first assumptions that settlers and enslavers made about people of African descent when they were enslaving. This never happened in actually earlier forms of slavery, by the way. When the Europeans enslaved Black people, the first assumption and the debate that they had was, and they concluded in their mind, that Black people did not have souls. So the first assumption as to why they would be the kind of people that would be enslaved was that, oh, they don't have souls, they don't have spirit, and therefore they could be enslaved. That was the first justification. So, for me, when I think about, these questions of liberation and all these debates and contestation, it's like the first then response should be that I have a soul. And Islam explains clearly why and what that means, and why a person with soul is required to fight oppression and all of these things, right? So in that sense, when you were explaining that material responses are never adequate, and our teacher, for example, Amir Abdul Malik, always teaches us that when we can never match materially the oppressors,
Right.
and therefore we can't fight them at that level,
Right.
only, right? We do want to change world powers, we do want to change situations, but we can only fight them really well. And this comes from Umar bin Khattab too, that he says never, you can never match them. If we actually lose our spiritual life, we can never win. We can only win because Allah allows us to win, and because of our dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we fight better at every level. But anyway, that's something that came to me when you were explaining the question of the soul, that the first assumption, hey, reclaiming the fact that there is a soul. And that's a big step in my view, for any group.
And I think that exactly what you're talking about kind of relates right back to the book with Safiya Bukhari, specifically the question around the why me or why us and why is this happening. She talks about wrestling with this question, like while basically going underground, while being in prison, throughout like a large course of her hardships during her political journey. And at points when she didn't have books, no Quran, no nothing, she would be in her cell and she would be, she'd be asking a lot, these questions. And, she breaks it down that her faith, her spirituality, and her politics were tried by fire. And that basically these hardships allowed her the strength and the fortitude to continue this fight once she got out. Like specifically, if I can, I want to read
please do.
a part from the book. I think it's around page 64. So I'm going to read it and skip through a little points of it because it's really long, but there's specific points that are important. Then on January 25th, 1975, while a member of the Amistad Collective of the Black Liberation Army, I was involved in a shootout in Norfolk, Virginia. One of my comrades was killed, another was shot, and I was captured. My bail was set at $1 million on each 5 counts, and on one of the counts, I was facing the electric chair. While the shootout was occurring and the capture was going down, I was on autopilot. I didn't have time to think, only to react. But when I finally had time to reflect, what kept going through my mind were all the things I had read in the Quran and the intentions of the heart, and how if those were correct, Allah would allow you to be victorious. I began to question a lot. Why? Why did you allow this to happen to me? Over the next 2 months while awaiting trial in Norfolk City Jail, while making salat 5 times a day, while being kept in solitary confinement, I repeatedly posed this question. Finally, the answer began to come to me. Think ye because you say, I believe that, Bismillah. Think ye because you say, I believe that you will not be tested in your belief. Even though I was having these conversations with God about why he was allowing this to happen to me, notice I was still wondering why me. I was not afraid. I still recognized that Allah was God, and as long as he was with me, I was not alone. Right? So she basically talks about going throughout the struggle right here and throughout the whole course of her like prison sentence, and the fact that, you know, she wrestled with this and Allah allowed her to struggle, made her an appropriate person who was prepared for struggle, which goes back to, like, you know, we were talking about earlier with the question of morality within the struggle and how it's looked at, and the understanding of like a Western Eurocentric idea of God and you know, Allah's sovereignty. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because
that's
I feel like it relates exactly with what you're saying, like,
Absolutely.
you know, to a T.
Yeah, you know, and we find ourselves, you know, when you start to get deeper into this stuff, right? Like when you get involved with struggle and you get involved with sacrificing for the sake of struggle, questions come to you differently. You know, like her asking, you know, why Allah would allow this to happen to her was like, it's like opening a door, right? So on the one hand, the non-spiritual person might ask that like a rhetorical question. Well, if God's real, then why did God allow you to be oppressed?
Right. So,
You know, but what Safiya Bukhari is teaching us here with this example is that her questioning why Allah would allow this to happen to her was like opening a door through which she's having her own personal revelation from Quran. Where what she read in Quran is now speaking to her life, her soul directly. Did you think you would not be tested?
Right.
Did you think you would get an A without taking the test? And here's a fundamental point for us that we have to acknowledge and take a moment to sit with as Muslims. We're fundamentally different than a lot of the other revolutionaries we may engage with, etc. And the primary fundamental difference is we believe in the next life. We believe that next life is bigger than this life. The next life is deeper. The next life is real, while this life is fake. This life is an illusion.
It's a testing ground.
The next life is real, right? And so part of the process is the test is weeding out those who are unworthy of paradise. The test is weeding out those who are unworthy for the VIP section. Right? You know, we're talking about the VIP section. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. Everyone could get there, but not everyone would get there. Why? Because everyone doesn't want to take the test.
Well, there's a worldly seduction.
Exactly, right? So people want to look at this world and they want to make this world
comfort, you know,
into their God. They want to make this world into their everything. And this is where so many people get tripped up when we talk about spirituality, because if you think this world is it, you'll never understand anything we have to say. You will never understand it. The best you can hope for is a very superficial misunderstanding of what we're saying. So you have to first start with the point that this is the illusion, right? And the real world is the one to come. The real life is the next life, right? And so when Sofia's talking about, did you think you wouldn't, when she's, you know, quoting Quran, did you think you wouldn't be tested? It's something that we all have to reflect on for the fact of, why was I put into this struggle? Right? And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said he did not fear for his ummah to be rich or to be poor. He did not fear for them to be poor. They'll be all right if they're poor, because Allah's blessing is with the poor and oppressed people. Because they will struggle. And that struggle will purify them and make them worthy of the VIP section.
Mm-hmm.
What he feared is for his ummah to become rich hypocrites, for them to become rich and callous, for their hearts to become hardened with the love of this world. And so we really have to reflect on that to get the real meaning of things, to get the real understanding of things, which is that why was I put into this situation? Why were my ancestors put into slavery? That's like, well, you know, why was I given this high-paying job? Nobody says that.
Right, no one says
when
that.
you get placed into a very well-paying career, nobody says, why did I get put in this high-paying job? No, we don't say that. What we say is, what do I got to do to keep that money coming in? Right? What we say is, what do I have to do to keep it secure? What are my responsibilities in this deal? And that's what we as Muslims have to think. It's like, okay, it's not why was I put in the struggle. I understand that the struggle is my pathway to purification and blessings.
Right. The way to guarantee, because, you know, even paradise got levels.
Right.
Not everybody gonna meet all the prophets, you know, peace be upon them. The way to guarantee that he would meet the prophets, peace be upon them, inshallah, is to actually struggle for the cause of Allah and then be a martyr. This is why Islam is such an inspiration. You know, one of the Russian soldiers said about Muslims when they were fighting, Russia was fighting the Mujahideen, they said, you can never win. And this is a material, for those of our viewers who are interested in winning also, you can never win against the people who see freedom into the barrel of your gun. You can never win against them because they're like, if you kill me, I'm going where I need to go.
Because we recognize,
you know,
that the struggle is the way. Me, I have sins. I have,
exactly.
By this age, me, I'm
Everyone
34.
does.
I've accumulated sins.
Right.
I've accumulated sins. So I'm gonna make tawbah. I'm gonna repent. I'm gonna beg Allah to forgive me. I'm gonna beg Allah to take my sins away from me. But one of the surest ways of removing the sins from you is your own suffering and sacrifice and struggle.
Exactly.
You know, Allah does not cause the believer to suffer except that the believer's suffering is a means of expiating their sins.
Precisely.
And so when we think about struggle, sisters and brothers, we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep that clear and focused. Why were my people put into this struggle? Well, if we understand it this way, then what you're essentially asking, why did Allah favor my people?
Right.
Why did Allah favor us?
There's more chance of all this forgiveness.
Put us at the front of the line to gain blessings through struggle.
That's right.
Why did Allah favor us so that our daily life ensures purification of our hearts and our souls?
Wisdom. And this is the thing. Secular revolutionaries can't actually have that wisdom. And as a result, it will be a kind of frustration because the world will not answer the questions that they have. You know what I'm saying? The world is limited. And we're trying to go to infinite beauty. We have interested in the infinite paradise, not a world utopia that resolves the problems, you know, which doesn't mean sit down and accept, but it's the exact opposite.
You know, and just to bring us back, you know, to the topic, this for me comes back to my next question, which is what concerns Safiya Bukhari. How did she struggle to overcome shirk? And actually, I'm jumping ahead. How did Islam aid her during her time as a political prisoner? Because what we're talking about is a struggle. And we're talking about, you know, how Islam enables a person to struggle. It enables you to gain Allah's blessings, right? Well, what does Safiya Bukhari say about it? What can we glean from her? What can we learn from her life and her experiences and examples?
Yeah, and I think in this chapter in particular, in entirety, it talks about that. Like every single part of.
Oh, 1 second.
Okay, guys, take a 2-minute intermission. Get you something to drink, stretch,
Are we still live? It's saying we're live,
We
but
should be live.
is it? Can you check? We just want to make sure we're not having a technical concern. It's saying we're still on live.
We're live.
Okay. You can see that right now we're live? Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry about that
All good.
disturbance.
So, yeah, she talks about that actually a lot. And really, it kind of like she talks about being in that situation with nothing but Islam strengthened her faith, and it allowed her to struggle through, but also to see that struggle is 24/7. That the struggle is not just when you're on advantageous terms against your enemies. It's at every single point in your life. So I wanted to read a little bit where she talks a little bit about how Islam kind of like fortified her analysis while she was in prison. So this is on page 70 of The War Before. 2 years after entering Goochland, I escaped. This was the prison that she was in. Everything had came to a head at one time. I had decided that I would wait for word on my appeal before doing what I had been trained to do. At the same time, I had begun to hemorrhage from lack of medical attention. Medical care for my ovarian tumors. I was in constant pain, hemorrhaging and not receiving any medical care. Even though I had followed the prison rules, I still hadn't obtained any medical care. I had even offered to pay for the medical care myself, but the prison said no. I knew then that the only way I would get the medical care I needed was to go out and get it for myself. I made up my mind to leave the institution, but I prayed over it first. I needed to make my peace with Allah. I had gotten to the point where I truly believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, glorious and exalted, must be consulted in all things. While I was talking to Allah about my decision to leave, he showed me that I would indeed get away from Goochland, but he also showed me that I would return on the evening of December 31st, 1976. I escaped. That I would return. And on the evening of December 31st, 1976, I escaped. I was on escape from that date until February 21st, 1977. While on escape, I was seen by 2 doctors and told that I would have to make a decision to have an operation or to be in pain for the rest of my life. When I was recaptured and returned to Goochland, I realized that one of the reasons I was incarcerated was that Allah had a plan for my life. You see, nothing happens without Allah allowing it to happen. 3 things were happening simultaneously in my life. I was being reminded of a khutbah sermon by Imam Rasul Suleiman had given at the Sam Khoury Masjid in Green Haven when I declared Shahada. In this kutub, now remember that she didn't have no books, they wouldn't allow her access to no Islamic information. So this is just her dependent on Allah to restore in her memory and her understanding what she needs to know to get her through. In this khutbah, Imam Suleiman stated that there were 3 forms of jihad. The first was internal jihad, wherein you struggle to change those within that are incorrect. The second jihad is with your immediate family. The third is with the community. I was and still am engaged in the first jihad. I was learning that there was only one God and that he is all-knowing, all-wise, and all-powerful. I was learning that Islam is not a religion that you observe only on Friday or when you are in the company of other Muslims. Islam is a way of life. You live with its tenets 24/7. Allah is constantly in your remembrance. At the same time that I was dealing with that jihad, I was reminded of the admonishment to wage struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found. The lack of quality or even adequate medical care at Virginia Correctional Center for Women was an issue over to which way to wage struggle. I determined that when I went to trial, I was going to plead not guilty to the escape charge by reason of duress and necessity, citing the lack of medical care and the fear for my life as the reasons for my escape. I also decided that I would represent myself. Now, this is her deciding to use herself and risk her own potential, legal harm to bring this issue to the forefront for the rest of the women, some of which who she already explained in the chapter, a lot of which are not Muslims. So just the fact that they're in a position of being oppressed, she had a responsibility. And she kept asking earlier, why me? Why me?
Right.
All of this is starting to become clear to her now. Why me? I received support.
If I can,
yes.
I want to comment on that, right?
Yeah.
Like, cause she might be saying, why me?
Right.
But those sisters in that prison, they could have been praying for her to come the whole time.
Mhm.
Like, Allah, please, God, send us some help.
Mhm.
Send us someone who
Yeah.
will fight for us.
That's
Send
right.
us someone who will
That's
lead
right.
us and take up our issues.
Mhm.
So you never know. You may be asking yourself, why me? But the very fact of you being put in that situation, it
Mhm.
might be a mercy and a help for the people you were placed among.
Mhm.
They might have had a need of you. And
Right.
then God caused you to suffer in order to be closer to
Right.
the people who needed you.
That's right. That's right. No, that's a beautiful observation, man. It's highly likely. Because
Right.
sometimes even in the Quran it says that sometimes actually Allah actually does this to some people where they can't hear anymore the truth. Their hearts don't see the truth. They can't see everything. It's veiled. Their vision is veiled. The real vision, the spiritual vision.
Yeah.
So as a result, you become bitter and you can't actually access the truth, the haqq.
Yeah.
And I think this is stories like Safiya Bukhari is so significant because it feels like to an atheist that accidentally she came to Islam.
Right.
But it was the master plan.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right,
It was the
right.
master plan that allowed a real mujahid to join the struggle. Allah wanted her in Islam. Without Allah's wanting her, she wouldn't be in Islam. So it's not just a personal choice that she made. And that's for all of us who came to Islam, or who had activated a higher level of Islam. Like for me, I was born Muslim, but after I saw what happened in 9/11 and the targeting, the interest in Islam became different. It became a mode of life. Prior to that, it was kind of complacent, right? So these are the kinds of things, events that may feel accidental, but you never know. And 9/11 is an important history because after that, conversion rates in the West doubled and tripled and multiplied. So, it's not just human action. Allah's got a plan. So anyway, going back to your information.
Yeah, so and then just the other part I wanted to mention in regards to that was when she talks about, you kind of mentioned in the question how she overcame personally her shirt. And so, just this section I want to read right here. There was one more thing that I had to learn as a Muslim and as a revolutionary. From the day I became Muslim, I had been told about shirk, the assigning of partners to Allah, or polytheism. There is no greater sin than shirk, believing that there is someone or something more worthy of worship or fear than Allah. I thought I had that one down pat. I knew that there was no other God but the one God. Inshallah, ilallah, ilallah. I bear witness that there is nobody worthy of worship or fear but Allah. The problem was that I also had an overwhelming fear and uncontrollable and irrational fear. This fear superseded and overshadowed even my faith in Allah. What could that be, you ask? I was scared beyond reason of snakes. I kept going back in my capture to my capture in Norfolk and the things that went through my mind then. I knew I was facing the death penalty. For 30 days, this hung over my head. That didn't worry me. I was alone in a hostile environment. That didn't worry me. What worried me was how I would handle it if they attempted to use my fear of snakes to obtain information about my comrades and activities in the Black Panther Party or Black Liberation Army. I didn't know how I would stand up to that kind of interrogation. I knew how real my fear was. And before I read the last part, how she gets over it, I just wanted to point out, this is very practical.
Very practical.
Very practical, spiritual discipline and necessity, value of faith in Allah. Like, this is not just some, I need some greater being to rationalize my lack of scientific understanding. This is, if I'm not scared of anything else but my creator, they can't do nothing to harm me. I'm going to hold the line. And she knew that she had this weakness, so she went about intentionally trying to discipline herself, with the help of Allah, disciplining herself to avoid that. So then, like, she talks about a little later, like when she finally gets out on parole, she went straight to the Bronx Zoo and went to the snake pit and just sat there for like hours, like just looking at the snakes, like probably talking to them, was like, "What's up, bro? You ain't so bad." Like just dealing with her issue of because she wanted to fear nothing but Allah.
That's right.
And that fear And that of Allah drove her to a very practical thing. Like, because if they knew she was scared of snakes, they sit her down in the first 48 and was like,
Right.
you know,
exactly.
where's Jalil or where's Daruba or whatever? Just show
Yeah.
a fake snake would have broken her. But the fact that she, and you know, that the fact that didn't happen, you know, is a mercy from Allah, because as she was cognizant of that fact, and you know, she was making tauba. She was trying to, even while she was in prison. So I just wanted to read that.
And that's important because as revolutionaries who become involved with serious projects and don't just sit around like reading books and making quotes, but like people who really become involved in serious projects, they get targeted, right? They get targeted, and maybe their comrades get arrested, or maybe they get arrested, or somehow some of them come under pressure, they get locked up, they get targeted with cases, etc. And if you're a serious revolutionary, you have had a moment already, or if you're young, maybe you will soon. If you're young, I'll give you a pass. If you're older, you've had this moment already. So let's be honest. Yeah. You've had a moment where you recognized one of your weaknesses and thought, man, this could get used against my comrades. That's right. This weakness I have, this could get used against my sisters and brothers. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. I don't know how I'm going to resist that, right? And I'm going to pray that it doesn't happen. But ultimately, it's decided by Allah. Yeah. So, you know, in the past, I can recall like certain weaknesses I had that I actually had to worry about until Allah removed it from me. Right. That happened to me too. I actually had real fears, and the fear wasn't like, oh, I'm afraid that this is going to happen to me. Right. But it was like, I'm afraid this is going to get used and manipulated by the enemy. Right. Because if they just know that I have a weakness, they're going to take advantage of it with all of their money, resources, intelligence agencies, you know, surveillance teams, whatever. They're going to find it and they're going to use it against the people that I love. Right. You know, and we've all had something like that, maybe multiple things like that. But ultimately, it's up to Allah. And by reflecting on that thing, we have to seek closeness to Allah. We have to say, like, God, please, like, you know, you have to get closer to the Creator. And you know, when you recognize that weakness, you're like, man, the only thing that's going to save me is the Creator. Ain't nothing else going to come in and stop them from using this weakness. So that's something interesting to think about, you know. If you haven't really been involved with a lot of serious projects, or if you're kind of like, you know, superficial revolutionary or part-time, or or you know, part-time funded, you know what I'm saying? If you're funded, state approved, you know, if you're in that sector, where you're getting thousands and thousands of dollars from Ford Foundation and Haas Jr. and things like that, you're probably not worried about it. Right. It probably doesn't even cross your mind. You're probably just chilling somewhere looking for more comfort. Right. You know?
You know, that's interesting you bring that up about thinking about the fears. Yeah. I always, when I was reading, because I always read about various torture techniques that different regimes use. And one of the things that the Palestinians have to go through under the Israelis is they use this thing called the grave. They put you in a box, basically, which is like the grave, and they torture you by keeping you in a really enclosed space, so you don't really can breathe that much. But they leave enough air so you can survive somehow. And I was always in my mind like, man, that's gonna be a tough one. If that ever happened, the grave would be a problem for me, right? And around that time, I had to do a medical exam where I had to experience. Is it the what do you call it? MRI? Man, that was tough. But I experienced that basically in a medical situation when I was thinking that, and I had to go and get this MRI done. But I was like, man, that's gonna be tough. And that experience was like being in that very enclosed, you know, not being able to breathe. But anyway, you know, inshallah, that's, you know, those are, I wouldn't think about it like that spiritually. I would think about it as just an accident.
Yeah.
But because
Yeah.
I was Muslim, I was like, man, Allah just made me
Yes.
put that in that situation.
Yeah.
You know, where I had to experience
Yes.
this. You know.
I mean,
And
fear is
inshallah.
real, you know, and there's things that you're gonna have an instinct to fear, but you have to challenge yourself, and you have to face it, and you have to face it with taqwa. You have to face it with God consciousness, or you have to face it with a mind state of, you know, being connected to your Creator and seeking your Creator's help with the fear that you're facing, right? And you know, I mean, that's, I think, a very important part of what we have to deal with. I mean, the first time I ever considered this kind of thing, when I was a teenager, I read the book 1984, and the main character, his name is Winston, I believe. But at a certain point, throughout the book, Winston talks about his fear of rats, and then at a certain point, when he gets like captured and what have you, the way that they torture him is by like locking him and it's a thing on his face with a rat in it, and so that they're using the fear as a weapon. And it's not as much about the physical pain or whatever. It's really about the psychological fear that that they want to use and tap into and manipulate. And so part of it is like, okay, you may be very afraid of a certain thing, but you should seek refuge in Allah from the fear. Yeah. I mean, seek refuge from the thing, but even more than the thing, seek refuge from the fear. Right. Because the fear is what can compromise you. Right. You know what I mean? The thing itself, Allah can bring you through it. Whatever it is, Allah can bring you through it. Right. But the fear itself, when you put your fear in something other than Allah, a kind of fear that's reserved for Allah, right? Then it could be used against you. That can get used against you, and that can corrupt you. You know, and so that's a very important thing to consider. And I mean, going through chemotherapy and stem cell transplants and biopsies and all these kinds of things, I had a lot of different fears that came up, and ultimately, you know, Allah used that time to strengthen me internally. You know, to strengthen my resolve and to accept the path that He'd given me. You know, so that's a very important reflection. I have a question for Abdul Rahman, though. Yes, sir. do you go ahead, go ahead. If you want to stay on that. No, I want you to ask the question. You know, so you know, when I was thinking about Safiya Bukhari's work, and there are parts in her writing where she's talking about how to resolve internal contradictions in the BLA and in the organization and organizing. And it seems very relevant for our work. And if you could just talk about what Bukhari faced and how did she think about what in revolutionary circles is to combat liberalism internally and the contradictions internally, how to deal with that, and what did she do, and what can we learn from her?
Definitely. So her story in dealing with internal contradictions and like issues within an organization is extremely relevant. So it's a part right here that I want to read, and it's from actually the chapter in the book, I believe, experiences within the Black Panther Party. And she talks about during the course of the split between the Black Panther Party, which is oftentimes incorrectly analyzed as East versus West, when it really had to do with Panthers who wanted to remain above ground and those who wanted to, I guess, initiate underground armed clandestine work. So during this, she talks a lot about the struggles that she was facing and a lot of the issues, and what led to the demise of the Black Panther Party was the fact that they had to fight the struggle on three fronts because of the fact that liberalism had swelled the ranks of the Black Panther Party. And she talks about it there's also a chapter in there talking about the question of sexism within the Black Panther Party. And she talks about some of the liberties that brothers were taking with sisters, and how we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think it's relevant.
Yeah, you got to bring up that example.
Islamic Adab, and how she was brought up on charges within the Black Panther Party for being, I guess, the equivalent to sexually Eurocentric because the brother like wanted her and she wasn't with it. And so
Wow.
this brother went to the commanding officer and basically accused her of being like Eurocentric for not wanting to have sex with him.
Wow.
So she talks about how like from that, as well as like hero worship and the cult of the personality and people starting to listen to certain leaders because they were well known as opposed to they had the correct position.
Right.
So she talks about fighting the struggle on 3 fronts in that they had the struggle with the BLA was pushing to galvanize the masses to understand the necessity and the benefit of the military action. And they also had the internal political struggle within the split, and the people who felt like there shouldn't be any military action, and the people that felt like, well, there should be both, you know. And then also they had the front that they were fighting from the repression of COINTELPRO, and her in particular suffered a big issue during the course of the split. So because of these internal contradictions, the government was actually able to take advantage of that. For example, I'm gonna read this section here from experiences in the Black Panther Party. After the split, it was a time of paranoia. This is page 29, I believe. The resulting violence was totally opposed to what the party was about. COINTELPRO brought about a war inside the party through COINTELPRO. People worked under the guise of being Panthers and instigated incidents. Threats were made over the telephone and we feared for our lives. They created a war atmosphere. One example of what happened was that one member, Robert Webb, was told in a phone call with the West Coast that people were coming to take care of him. Robert Webb is one of the people who spoke when there's a large meeting leading up to the split, spoke to some of the grievances that rank and file party members had with some of the leadership. And he was very vocal apparently about that. He was also the father of Safiya Bukhari's daughter. So he was told in a phone call with the West Coast that people were coming to take care of him. Then in March 1971, he was shot and killed on 125th Street and 7th Avenue. To show further how the police were involved, this is now 1988, and no one has yet been tried or even arrested for Robert's death. It was as if it were sanctioned. We knew who killed Robert, and we made that very well known. It was even published in the paper, yet no one did anything. The person was a paid killer receiving thousands of dollars. Robert was killed right out on a Monday afternoon in front of chock full of nuts on 125th and 7th Avenue. His bodyguard had been pistol whipped and he was killed, and the police did nothing. It was clear that they were working in conjunction with the killers. So our paranoia really wasn't paranoia at all. We actually had a basis in fact to be on the defensive.
So if we can sum that up a little bit, we're talking about the child of her father was murdered for raising the concerns of the rank and file members within the Black Panther Party.
Father of her child, yeah.
And this has some overlap with some of the stuff we covered previously because I believe we covered this not in as much detail, but it was mentioned in Black fighting formations and the Dragon and the Hydra.
Right.
And what you're talking about here is and what Safiya Bukhari is talking about here is this internal conflict between these different modes of operation, like the Dragon and the Hydra, you know, and sadly, you know, her child's father is bringing up these concerns of people, bringing up the contradictions in morals, ethics, principles being practiced by some of the Black Panther Party leadership. You know, the ones with this idea of democratic centralism,
right?
And we know that you know Maroon breaks that down for us, you know, and we talked about some of these contradictions about of democratic centralism, and we see here, you know, with Robert Webb, that these things have serious consequences. These things have very serious consequences. And the thing that's missing in those people, and I would argue, the thing that's missing in those people who are in those authority positions and who are implementing this kind of democratic centralism is a sense of accountability. A sense of accountability to something greater than themselves.
Right.
You know, like for us as Muslims, we know that we are accountable to Allah. Right. We're gonna have to answer. We're gonna have to answer for what we did with authority. If we were given authority over others, we have to answer for how we exercise that power. Right. We have to answer for the decisions we made, the actions we took, etc. But those people who are solely materialists and don't believe in day of judgment, they don't believe in divine accountability, right. What's going to put them in check? What's going to stop them from murdering people to maintain power? Right. What's going to stop them from slandering people to maintain power? What's going to stop them from doing any number of terrible things, right, simply to maintain control and power of their position and authority? And I would say that if they don't believe in the day of judgment, if they don't believe in divine accountability, divine justice, then there's nothing within them to prevent that. There's no set of ethics, principles, morals, etc., to keep them in check. And you know, they may be communists, socialists, anarchists, whatever ist that comes with its own set of ethics, etc. Right. But none of them comes with any set of ethics or morality that says, without a doubt, without question, without variation, you will absolutely be held accountable. Right. None of them believe that. Right. None of them believe that. So in place of that, what they fight for is this kind of idea of worker consciousness, the masses, you know, building up the power of the proletariat, right, building up the power of the worker, etc. Right. So that way, that an empowered body of workers could collectively, potentially do what they believe God cannot. What they believe God cannot, which is to hold their leadership and to hold their leaders accountable. Right. But they ultimately don't believe that it's automatic. They believe that has to be made to happen. It has to be organized. The workers have to be organized and educated. Consciousness has to be raised. Right. Otherwise, there will be nothing in place to put in check those men of corruption, those men of power who are corrupt. There's nothing in their doctrines that says you're going to automatically be held accountable on this day.
Conscious or not, you got the Sharia.
That's right. So for us, it's automatic. It's like, look, if no one saw you do something corrupt, but you did it, you will answer for it. Right. Even if there was no other witnesses. That's right. There's Allah and his angels who will bear witness against you. That's right. If no one else saw you, if no one knows the corrupt deed that you did, right? And
that's that should put fear of Allah in us.
Yeah, and so that's something that and people can argue against Islam is Arab, it's this, it's that, and people make these kinds of arguments. But ultimately, we have a system of accountability that happens with or without us. It doesn't rely on any of us. Yeah. Take me out of the equation, you're still going to be accountable. Right. Take all the educated workers out of the equation, you're still going to be accountable. You're still going to answer for what you said and did. So that's a kind of check that comes within Islam that checks corruption at the level of power, at the level of
Mhm.
authority, right? Now, a person can be an extreme hypocrite and can claim that authority, claim that power, etc., without the fear of Allah. But man, I mean, man, may Allah protect us from that. I would not want that fate.
Right.
I would not want that fate, you know. And for most of us, it's enough to merely know I'm gonna be held accountable for this. Let me treat this person right. Let me be just. Let me be fair. Let me allow the truth to be spoken. Let me allow the truth to be heard, because I am gonna have to answer for this.
Yeah. No, that's sure. Yeah. We're coming close to the end, and maybe we should take questions if there are questions from the audience. And if you want to add other things,
I just wanted to add one real quick thing before we take questions, is just to expand kind of on the situation with Robert Webb, and looking at why Islam and morality is important. When you look at the importance of like Islamic personality and adab and your behavior and the way in which you operate, you know, it eliminates things like backbiting, which gave fuel to the fire for COINTELPRO to do their work. The lack of moral etiquette or Islamically moral etiquette between people gave room and invited in, you know, the whisperings of the shaitan. COINTELPRO did its work because people, like she says, committed liberalism, and people didn't accept, you know, communal or self-criticism. And so, being that that's commanded Islamically of every Muslim, speaks to the practicality, again, just like, you know, getting over shirk. It speaks to the practicality of Islam while also like deeply sustaining you spiritually on like a metaphysical level. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out before we get to the questions, because like, you know, of course there's going to be issues. You know, people are going to argue, people are going to disagree, but if you prevent yourself from participating in a way that could potentially allow your enemy to harm you, then it's beneficial in the long run, even if you weren't proven to be right, because you guys struggled to get better as a collective, and you guys held each other up, and you know and can trust that the person with you ain't gonna let you fall just so they don't get you mad. You know, so yeah.
And you know, Abdul Malik Ali, one of our teachers, he talks about this concept of COINTELPRO, where, you know, if you take COINTELPRO and really examine it at the level of what is it based on, et cetera, COINTELPRO is essentially like the personality of the shaitan.
That's right.
If it was made into an institution.
Material force.
You know, it's like,
that's a great way to,
you know what I mean? Use people's appetites against them.
Right.
Use people's shortcomings. Use people's weaknesses. Use the conflicts between people and feed them. Create conflicts and feed them.
Right.
So that brother will fight against brother and sister will fight against sister. And you know,
and sisters will fight against brothers.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to go there with that.
No. All of the above. Everybody fighting.
We're learning from Tommy Curry.
But you know, the general attitude and personality of like constant conflict, creating division, petty conflicts, not being willing to resolve differences, you know, just all of this stuff, right? And then to think about it from another perspective, right? When we talk about this enemy that we're facing, the oppressor, the organized force of exploitation and subjugation, of death and violence and brutality, you're talking about a force that doesn't fight you with its strength.
Right.
Even though we see them as stronger than us.
Yeah.
We see them as bigger than us materially, right? Having money and
imperialist
and
force,
everything, right? But they don't fight us with the thing they have more of. What they fight us with is
us.
our weaknesses.
Right.
They fight us with our weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
Like Steve Biko said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. That's the greatest weapon. Not the tanks, not the fancy lights, not the sonic sonar weapons and lasers and all the stuff that we know that they have. That ain't what they use when they come for us. What they use when they come for us is our own weaknesses, which we have
There's plenty
a greater influence over and control over than they do. Exactly. They use
exactly what you
they
said.
use what we offer them. We offer them our weaknesses. Well, yeah, that's my brother, but I don't like that nice shirt that he wears. So, you know, I mean, I owe him some rights, but, you know, we don't jive like that. So, you know, because of that, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to go over here and I'm going to talk to this other brother. I'm going to talk to this sister and I'll be like, man, you know, so-and-so.
Stay away from him.
Nah, he not really about that life.
Right.
You know, he always wearing them nice shirts and stuff, and
or even I heard he was talking to such and such's wife on the low, and then
I heard this
spreading around and
telephone,
back, and then,
or maybe one person saw one of your shortcomings or sins.
Yeah,
and it was a
and
private
covering
thing,
the weakness,
and they're supposed to
the
protect
opposite.
it. They're supposed to cover over it. They're supposed to like play it down. And they feed into it, and they tell it, and then it spreads, and then as it spreads, everyone adds their little piece to it.
Right.
This is the kind of stuff that we get up to as a community, right? This is the kind of stuff that we get up to, and we think it's petty, we think it's small, we think it's not a big deal. Like, I'm just talking about somebody, but what's my little 3 sentences gonna hurt?
Right.
Well, let's, you know,
according
when you
to
think
Sofia
about
Bukhari,
it, you know, it's like the first thing that has to go is unity. The first thing that has to go is unity. So if we can just come up with some categories that people will self-divide themselves into, right? Like, you know, light skin, dark skin, old, young. Like, you've heard the Willie Lynch stuff, right? But then socialists, anarchists, communists, Muslim, Islamists, this thing, that thing, right? So there's a number of categories, even within Islam. There's, you know, Sufi, Salafi, this thing, that thing. You know, there's different things that people divide themselves into, right? Which may be a real division, it may be a false division, but either way, those categories are what allows one to get played against the other, right? And we divide ourselves, and we create these we create lanes and opportunities for the shaitan to roll through and say, "You fight you," and then we fight, and then those of us, the weakest among us, the weakest among us, the lousiest among us, get promoted. They get paid. Right. And their weaknesses become the dominant influence. Right? So this is something that, this is how they fight us. They don't send a tank into your neighborhood until they see they can't divide you. Right. When they can't divide you, that's when they got to rely on their material, whatever, right? Yeah. And so that's something for us to keep in mind. Just all the number of different ways that they use rhetoric, right? Like how much of quote unquote movement is just rhetoric now, right? You know, how much of it is organizing and how much of it is just fighting people over rhetoric. You know, so I'm gonna fight you over this ism and that ism, and we're gonna fight each other, your rhetoric versus my rhetoric, when at the end of the day, there's at least 5 programs that we can agree on.
Right.
that we could work together to materialize.
Right.
But instead, I'm gonna fight you until my last breath over socialism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm gonna fight you to my last breath over communism, over anarchism,
Right.
over feminism,
Right.
over capitalism,
Ideologies of the
over,
world.
You know what I'm saying? Over any over any ideology,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where ultimately we don't actually control it. And then if you follow those ideologies,
Yeah.
those isms, where do they lead back to?
Right.
Most of them lead back to Western universities.
Right.
Constructed and financed by the same vampires that are colonizing the whole world.
Right.
You know, like Bob Marley said in one of his songs, you know, through their church and universities,
right,
graduating thieves and murderers.
Right.
So these same spaces that are graduating people who go on to design new bombs and new torture devices, they're also creating ideologies for us to fight each other over.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Like when you look at humanities and when you look at the modern Western university and how much it's oriented towards taking things apart.
Yeah.
Towards dividing things and sectioning off things into different sections and sectors, etc., and into intersections and into you know what I'm saying? You see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
Sections, sectors, intersections, and ultimately secularism, where one thing is unrelated, divided from the other.
Right.
And then they say, all right, 3, 2, 1, fight.
Right.
You know? It's like,
exactly.
You know, I mean, anyway, my point being, just to kind of like tie it back in, is like, look at what Safiya Bukhari is saying about having to fight this battle on 3 fronts. And what did that do to the Panthers and to the BLA?
Right.
And what can we learn from that so that, you know, we're not just another repetition of the same thing, you know?
Are you able to access questions if there are? I see a lot of comments, but I don't think there were any specific questions. We can give you guys 10 more minutes or so.
Can you be a Marxist and a Muslim? People have approached this question in so many different ways. Man, I'm gonna take this just straight up line. No, you cannot. Why I'm saying no is, first and foremost, is that Marxism is, number one, you naming yourself after a man.
Yeah.
So you're saying that this man his thinking was so supreme that you're not gonna even think nothing unless he approved it. You're not gonna think in a particular way unless he laid it out in his Marxist conception. That could never be consistent with the supremeness of God, the supremeness of the Creator, that there's no partners, associates, nothing at that level, right? And then there's things that Marx has said, like which one could, like he says, religion is the opiate of the masses, which one could argue that doesn't apply to Islam, since Islam is not a religion. That's a kind of lazy argument, but ultimately, you know, what my argument with this is that you're talking about someone who so cavalierly writes off spirituality, who doesn't want to deal with spirituality, right? Instead, wants to deal with history and the dialectic of history, except none of that dark black and brown history stuff that, you know, shaped so much of the history of the world. Just like some, you know, narrow history within the confines of what him and Engels thought were you know, legitimate workers' struggles and legitimate world history as synthesized by dialectics. You know what I mean? I mean, like the level of arrogance is crazy. That's my first reaction. But I want to shift to Tanzania, because Tanzania is great with the receipts. One thing I love about Tanzania, he'll come with some receipts that you didn't even know there was a transaction, and he got the receipts.
That question is, to be a Marxist, Hannibal's answer is really important because there are certain metaphysical assumptions that you would actually make to fully go with Marx. The way I look, so I'm going to talk about the receipts part, but the way I answer questions, not just about Marxism, but various forms of theories, social theories and economic theories, is that Saikuto kind of outlines the kinds of knowledge we can take and the kinds of knowledge we cannot take from secular sources. So I think as Islamic practitioners, we can utilize certain forms or parts or portions of theories that are applicable in understanding our world. And so I'm not a Marxist in terms of its metaphysical assumptions, but if I have to understand, let's say, economic crisis, right? So then I would look at certain Marxist texts to understand very specific details and arguments that are being given. So it's sort of like, like using a computer. That doesn't make me a person who fetishizes the computer to answer problems, but it's sort of like, how do we utilize that? Using weapons that are useful for my safety, for example, right?
If you were using a computer, does that make you a computerist?
Doesn't. Right? That's my whole point. And that's my whole point, that we should be able, as Muslims, utilize various things that are there as long as they do not create problems with our own metaphysical questions that are given by the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith and the Sharia. So it's about just benefits in terms of that, right? So even like, let's say if you look at all these modern conversations about gender, we cannot take that because Islam has its own normative understanding of relations between gender and so on. So that would be my answer. One of the things that's interesting about Marx is that Marx was writing to Engels that our concept of class comes from the concept of race. There is a citation in another theorist, Michel Foucault, identifies this because he has this lecture series, and one of the lecture series is called Society Must Be Defended, where he's talking about how Western societies create various forms of legitimacies and institutions to defend itself in its own form of what society should be. And he's kind of citing Marx in this letter, writing to Engels about how class actually comes from race. So that's a very interesting thing because it's a huge debate in sort of, in secular circles and academic intellectual circles, no, race comes from class, or race could be reduced to class. Marx himself is saying class comes from race, that our very scientific use of the term class actually comes from the original experience of how race was used as a category. So I thought that was a very interesting thing. So, I hope my answer is not confusing. I'm not actually conflicting with my brother here about Marxist versus having a sense of political economy crisis, because we're trying to create a new intelligentsia that utilizes knowledge while at the same time maintaining full-on aqidah, full-on doctrinal value of Islam. So there should be no contradiction there. If you feel like you're replacing Islamic assumptions with assumptions of Marx about what the human being is, that's a huge contradiction and complete no-no.
Well, and just to be to go circle back to the question was, can you be a Muslim and a Marxist?
Right.
Now, you can certainly be a Muslim and study Marx.
Exactly.
You can study Marxist theory.
Right.
You can, you can go deep into it.
Right.
You can make a whole
career
out of it.
Right. Be involved in a Marxist organization like the Black Panther Party while
right.
a Muslim, but
And you know, that's something we
No, that's
talked
good.
about with Ram conversation,
Yeah.
that we want our brothers and sisters, if they're able to deal with it and not be converted to something,
Right.
to be part of various organizations and struggles, because we want to change certain things from within. If it's possible, those of us are able. And I've done that myself. I've been in ultra left circles, and actually it was, you know, I can openly say now, during that time I was in conversation with actual Islamists back home who had encouraged me that go in there and try to get some of these brothers and sisters to Islam. And that was something that I did, right? So, and of course I liked some of the people, they were good friends, and it worked for some people, right? Some of the folks came to Islam. Alhamdulillah, that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's, so it really depends on your iman, I think, your iman level. How much can you deal with, right? Some of us, we don't want to constantly talk to a bunch of secularists and you know, ruin our day and try to argue and debate. And some of us are able to actually maintain our composure and do some important work, because a lot of people we want to be in the struggle are actually not yet Muslim, and they might be doing very important work. So I hope, you know, our answers are not alienating.
And you know, and then there's also the question of language. So for a lot of people, Marxism is a language.
Yes.
That is the only language they know to communicate with others about certain issues, about certain history and what have you. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that's really important, just from what you're saying about, you know, race and class, etc., that so often we hear people say that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. But from our own studies with these issues, going back to the Spanish Inquisition, right, we know that the idea of the Oriental or the Orient was created as a response to like an Islamic liberation theology that was spreading inside of Spain, right? So Moors, or these Muslims that were coming from Africa and Arabia, etc., were in Spain, and they were developing certain cities. They were curing diseases. They were educating people, teaching people to read and write, etc. There was a number of things. They were developing the land, etc. There was this explosion taking place in Spain, and their reaction was the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades. And this is where they created the concept of the Orient and the Oriental, which is the other, as in ontologically different, as in not different colored human, but a different type of creature.
That's right.
Not okay, we have a different physical color, but you have a different type of creation. You have a different nature altogether, right? You are black. You are Oriental. You are this thing. And this is also where the idea comes from that we can be enslaved because we don't have souls. Right. Because you're talking about an idea that we're of a fundamental different nature from them. Right. And this is how they decided to fight Islam, because it was to say, you know, Islam is for them. They're another species. Christianity is for us. Right. And then from there, the battle wasn't clear, because you had some dark-skinned Christians and you had some light-skinned Muslims. Right. So they had to set it a little more clear, and they come up with this idea of blackness. They come up with this idea of race, right?
And you know, I would advance the Marxist point. When Marx says class comes from race, I would say race comes from Europeans making the category of religion.
That's my point. Yeah, and that's the point I'm making. They're dealing with a threat, right? Because Islam is coming in and influencing the peasantry. Right. They're saying you don't have to pay to pray. Right. That's correct. All people are created equal. You're a brother or a sister to the other believers. They'll teach you how to read and write. They created medicines and treatments, etc. All of these things, which are, you know, back to the questions that we kind of were dealing with in the past, improving the quality of life for the oppressed people. That's the only thing revolution is about. It's about improving the quality of life for oppressed people. And that's what Islam was doing inside of Spain. That's right. In Cordoba, in Granada, in Alhambra.
And you know, Westerners, they first categorized us as infidels.
Right.
before they categorized us as black or brown or
Exactly.
red or yellow.
Exactly.
You know, so
Exactly.
we were the infidels to them.
Because
so
the
we were a
church-
religious category.
The church and the monarchy, they had
Mhm.
certain taxes.
Right.
They had certain rituals, etc., that allowed them to maintain power over
Mhm.
their peasantry.
Right.
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 And they had created this elaborate structure, which goes back to this idea of like the moralisms and
Mhm.
things that people
Mhm.
question, etc. They had built this elaborate social system to keep the peasants poor and keep themselves rich and keep themselves living in excesses and whatnot while others are starving, etc.
Right.
And Islam started to disrupt that with the
Mhm.
Moors and the way that they were implementing Islam in relation to business contracts,
Mhm.
in relation to education,
Right.
in relation to these different things. They were implementing the deen, which was becoming a major disruption
Right.
for the powerful people in Spain.
Right.
And they had to come up with something to
Right.
fight back against it.
Yeah.
So they said, you know, these people are a different type of thing.
That's right.
That evolved into the idea of blackness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, they were calling everyone dark as black,
Right.
right? And so this idea of blackness was like a catch-all category
Mm-hmm.
that they were using to lump together everyone that was threatening to their power,
Right.
right? And ultimately, with that initial, with that set of events within Spain,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about a phenomenon that evolved out of that. And by creating the religious category and then the racial category, it allowed them to set the stage
Mm-hmm.
for colonization and slavery.
Right.
Because all people were taken prisoners in battle,
Right.
which would be considered slaves.
That's right.
If you went to war with another tribe, if you went to war with another nation,
Mm-hmm.
and you took prisoners, that's considered as slaves.
Right.
In talking about, you know, the
pre-modern
transatlantic slave trade,
That's
right?
That's right.
Pre-chattel slavery, right? You're talking about anyone who's taken prisoner ultimately was
Mm-hmm.
considered as a slave,
Right.
or anyone who served you, whether you paid them to serve you or not, that was considered as a slave.
Yeah.
Right. So if you paid someone to, you know, work in your house or whatever, that was considered as a slave.
Right.
By most societies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fundamental change in the nature of it and what we understand to be slavery today,
Right.
it was born in this reaction that the elite had in Spain
Mm-hmm.
to the influx of the Moors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that was possible because of the way they set up the religious separation, the racial separation, etc. Then they say, well, these people don't have souls. It's okay to enslave them.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they went about setting up this elaborate process,
Mm-hmm.
right? But ultimately, the foundation of it was, you know, you're talking about rich elite trying to maintain their power, trying to maintain their influence and authority,
Right.
in the face of a collective liberating process of
Mm-hmm.
Islam.
Mm-hmm. And guess what? All of that happened prior to the emergence of capitalism.
That's what I was.
So
and why I said all that was to say, you know, I'm sorry because I know I'm kind of getting long-winded with it, but the point is, all of this stuff is what
Mm-hmm.
creates the possibility and
Of
creates the
capitalism.
environment of which capitalism can emerge.
Yeah. In this particular location.
Yeah, in a particular way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so to say, you know, that as some do, that racism comes out of capitalism, that's like a vulgar Marxist position.
Yeah.
You know, that's like you bought so much into Marx that theory is the only thing that matters. History doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The actual historical sequence of events doesn't matter. It just matters the theory.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say anything you want if it as long as it supports the theory.
Right.
That ultimately it's like capitalism was the first evil that
Mm-hmm.
we're all dealing with now. And all these other forms of evil, they go back to capitalism.
Right.
You know, but ultimately capitalism comes about because of the Spanish Inquisition, because of the Crusades, because of things like the Berlin Conference and this collective phenomenon of seeing what we consider Black people now as a existential threat, right? Why do people see why is it certain white people see Black people and immediately feel threatened because their presence in Spain represented the erosion and the dismantling of this elitist kind of power that the monarchy and the church were holding. The noble blood, the queen and the noble blood, you know, her cousins.
Also, the civilizational power of Islam
yes,
was the fact that Europeans got civilized after they encountered Islam. You know, the Moors were civilizing them. And the what is interesting about Hannibal, the story that you're saying, the historical narrative, is that the process of fully evacuating Muslims out of Europe, it took about 100 years. Even though it started 1492, it took about 100 years. So people always talk about the date 1492, which is really significant because that was the starting point of the evacuation process. And that's also when Native America becomes Native America in the sense of like genocide process starts in America. But what people forget to talk about is that 100-year process around approximately 10 years after the complete evacuation of Muslims out of Europe, that particular population, is when you see the first slaves arrive in America also. And people don't think about that often. People don't make that connection between the Moors and slavery. They make the connection between the Moors and the genocide of natives, which is important, but they don't make the final picture, where about 10 years literally is when you see the first kidnapped Africans brought in America around that time. So it's very interesting to think about all of those things. We should look at other questions and
there's I got another question from the sister.
We need to wrap up fairly quick.
Can revolutions be organized adhering to gender segregation? Some Muslims believe in gender segregation, but I feel like if all you can see is my hands and face, I should be allowed in the room.
You want me to answer?
Yeah, go for it. Because obviously you have a response.
I do. So my response to that is that all forms of separation that comes from Islamic normative ethics and all forms of dressing that is consistent with the Sharia is absolutely something that needs to be respected. So we cannot use a Western gender ethic and enforce it on Muslims and expect them to conduct their relationship with each other according to a Western notion of gender. So the Islamic normative ethics is very clear. Yes, there is separation and distance between the genders in organized spaces, etc. So in terms of movement, though, it's very important to realize that Islamic struggle always involved sisters and their participation and involvement. There also, we would go to the Sharia to see what kinds of actions by brothers and sisters are permissible in terms of action against the enemies. I'll give an example of warfare, for example. We are supposed to exhaust our brothers first before sisters can physically go to warfare, for example, engage in physical jihad with the arms, because we want to actually respect and honor women. And this is about protection in the history of Islam.
Right?
Yeah.
You're talking about based on an organized, structured Islamic society.
That's right.
So you're not talking about in a vacuum, like, okay, 4 Muslims get together.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Because
I mean, for example, Hamas in
right?
Palestine would first go to the brothers,
right,
in order to protect and fight and etc. And sisters would have tremendous other roles as well.
Right.
But I'm talking about,
you're talking about the distinction which I want to make here is you're talking about an organized society or organized structure or movement of Muslims, right? And I know that a lot of times people tend to take Sharia and try to apply it to chaotic, non-Islamic societies.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, if that's what you're supposed to do under Islamic leadership, well, how can you do that while you're living in America in these conditions, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
And so one important point is that, you know, when we're talking about some of these things, some things have a precursor of the structure, et cetera, et cetera. Some things are like universal, like no matter where you're at, you're not supposed to do this.
Right.
No matter what's going on, you are supposed to do this.
Right.
But some things, like when you talk about exhausting the brothers, like in this level of disorganization we're in now, we couldn't even appraise the level of exhaustion.
No, and some societies is already exhausting happened.
Right.
And so that my whole point is precisely actually in support of that. That yes to Islamic gender separation, yes to movement. My answer is actually both positive, but to make sure that the Sharia is fully considered in our interactions, and that includes Sharia of warfare, so Sharia of retaliation, Sharia of how to fight. All of those things are in detail provided. So these are things that we're not going to make up, but there are room for certain developments as well in Islamic law. So those are also conversations that one would have to have with the ulama. So for example, if we think about non-state history, in the last 25 years, the ulama has been actually debating with each other what kinds of things can be done. How much could be certain things be stretched because Western power has so much intervention going on. So these are things, I don't want to name organizations for our own safety, but these are things that were discussed by various ulama. So my answer to that question, of course, sisters and brothers have to be in the struggle, but we have to think about very carefully and systematically about the Sharia, about how that needs to be done.
And you know, and to add on to that, it's like we, as Muslims, we're charged with the responsibility of revolution against oppression, of fighting against oppression, of removing oppression from society, etc., which is my understanding of revolution. We're charged with that as an obligation, but we're also charged with creating and maintaining a proper society, a proper Islamic society. So that means, along with the considerations of movement and revolution, which are a responsibility and obligation, there's a whole nother set of responsibilities and obligations that we have to constantly keep in mind and constantly be cognizant of, because unlike, you know, Marxists, for example, or whatever other ideology or what have you, we have the responsibility of, you know, taking care of the children in a particular way, taking care of the elders in a particular way, taking care of the natural resources in a particular way. We have very specific guidance for how we engage with creation, how we engage with the earth, how we engage with each other, how we engage with animals, what we eat, etc. We have a lot more guidance, and we have a lot more responsibilities,
provision from God,
than other people are considering in the way that they consider movement, right? So some people are thinking about movement, and for them, it's acceptable for movement to be the entirety of their consideration. That's acceptable because they don't have, according to them, they don't have other responsibilities and other things that they're charged with. But for us as Muslims, we're charged with the mechanisms, with everything that deals with the whole earth. So how we deal with the land, how we deal with the sea, how we deal with the animals, how we deal with each other, how we deal with our money that we make from working, is a whole host of things. Everything that has to do with your life, there is an Islamic way to do it and deal with it, which we are accountable to. So when we consider movement, we need to consider movement in a holistic way, but we also need to put movement in its proper place. That movement is our way of engaging with the larger responsibility and the larger obligation of towards the Creator, and what we were charged with, why we were created, right? And so the movement has to fit within the context, the broader, larger context of all of those responsibilities and all of those considerations. Which is why some of these things, where if you're just looking at movement, then gender separation may not look like a big deal.
All right.
But when you start considering the whole society and you start considering everything that must be in harmony,
right,
there's a lot of implications. And furthermore, we shouldn't be so arrogant and think that we could consider everything.
Mm-hmm.
Our minds are not designed to be able to consider everything.
That's right.
So we have to be limited to what we're capable of even imagining and dealing with.
Right.
And so the best thing for us is to stick to what guidance we were given.
And I would just add one small thing, which is that we as Muslims were obligated to have this perspective on the Sharia, which is, number one, we're obligated to think, even if we have some struggle to accept it, we're obligated to think that the Sharia is just. That includes everything in the Sharia. Number two, we're obligated to think that it's reasonable. Sharia is reasonable. Everything from inheritance, understanding of gender, understand everything. After we have that attitude of those two, then we can start having a conversation. Hey, brother, if we have a problem with something, like I don't understand why this particular passage in the Sharia law is like this or that, but the attitude cannot be that I have a value, it's not matching with the Sharia and I have to question it. Whether it's politics, whether it's ethics, whatever, whether it's warfare, anything.
Yeah.
So the attitude has to be towards the Sharia. It's just and it's reasonable. So anyway, that's how I would think about it and carefully.
Yeah. And think about it like this too, you know, if you had a group of doctors, if you had an economist, if you had a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
if you had a personal trainer, like a fitness trainer, whatever,
Right.
and you get all these experts together,
Right.
and they get their heads together and they come up with a system of life
Right.
for you
Right.
to be at your optimum, best well-being,
Exactly.
etc.
Exactly.
You're gonna struggle with some of that.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna struggle with some of their advice.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna struggle with accepting it. You're gonna struggle with practicing it. You're gonna struggle with one piece of advice from this one versus one piece of advice from that one, etc.
Right.
And so my point being is that the Sharia for us it's an economic system, it's a social system, a political system, it's a means of overcoming your personal shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of these a huge host of different things,
Mm-hmm.
all of your concerns as a human being
Right.
is dealt with there within,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, you know, if you accept this life, which is the pathway to success,
Right.
which is the pathway to Allah's mercy and blessings,
Right.
if you accept this life, then you need to have a humility towards that perspective.
Right.
You need to have a humility that says, let me try to understand what my Creator has sent for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not, let me try to fit this within my understanding.
Right. It's the exact opposite. We have to fit ourselves into the model that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us. He's our leader. Period. Point blank. Everything else comes later. So Sharia is such a beautiful thing when you think about Islam. Like, we make mistakes, all of that, right? But how it's a way, basically a legal framework, an ethical and legal framework that tells us how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived his life.
Yeah.
So every avenue he engaged in, this would probably be the most, but possibly the most accurate representation of how he would conduct himself. So of course, this is our model. This is our system. Yeah, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah, you know, with Allah's permission and with a little more arm twisting, we're hoping that next Saturday we're going to be getting into Washington. So inshallah, you know, stay tuned. There's still a couple things that we're trying to sort out with scheduling, so we're hoping to get a couple of these other guests. But inshallah, we're going to keep going. There's so much to cover. Again, we're covering people and stories which we felt needed more attention. So we're not covering everyone who could be a successor of Malcolm X. We're not covering everyone who's carried on the legacy, but we're covering people that we believe haven't got enough attention, and that we believe, you know, we would all benefit from more exposure to.
Yeah.
You know, so inshallah.
Inshallah. So thank you, Brother Abdul Rahman Shakur. We want you back, inshallah, so you can help us explain some of the other figures that we want to study and present to our viewers. I would like to make a very quick comment before we close it off today, which is that we saw on the internet that our dear brother Bilal Abdul Kareem, who is a phenomenal reporter, a journalist who works, he's an African-American brother who works for OGN, the network that gives us very important and accurate information about the Syrian struggle, and that he was taken by HTS and there's no proper information about his well-being. We're very, very concerned about his well-being, but we do realize that there may be many different foreign and local factors influencing how things are taking shape in the free region in which HTS is trying to create a legitimacy and have been legitimate for a while. So we're very concerned. We really want our brother Bilal to be unharmed and to be returned so he can do his work. He can provide information about the Syrian struggle, because there's a lot of misinformation about the struggle there. We don't want to just morally condemn an organization, however, but we do have tremendous concern, and we want the brothers in Syria to come to a proper understanding and to not harm our dear brother Bilal. And our prayers for him and his well-being and his family. And there are other people along with brother Bilal who've been taken in, aid workers and so on. We would want them to be freed as well. Inshallah, that's our dua for that and our wish, inshallah. And so we will come back next week. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for so many comments and following this episode and also the series that we have. We have a few more episodes coming up. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.